Thank you, everyone, for joining us again for another edition of the Rec Poker Podcast. We have a little fun over here recording these. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Jim Reed. You can find out all about me by going to rec.poker/Jim. I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, website AMP and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. But I am just one man here. I'm joined by a group of Rec Poker wizards. Wizards, why don't you tell the folks where they can reach you and a little bit about you?
I'm Chris Jones. I'm 5x5 on PokerStars and Twitter.
I'm John Somsky, and I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere.
I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Radman50 everywhere.
I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss, or if you want to tune in to Twitch, you can watch me on Twitch every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/poker.
That's right. We got all sorts of killers in the room tonight. And like every week, we are battling each other in the Rec Poker Nightly home game on PokerStars for play money, where all that's up for grabs is bragging rights and one of these beautiful, elusive bronze Rec Poker pins. And just like every week, we have taken a post from the forums at rec.poker to talk about. And some weeks we get a special guest. I'm so excited to introduce my friend Stu, who made this post and who has come to share some details about it here at Rec Poker. Stu, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So you're recently you joined the Rec Poker Premium membership last year. It's been great having you in the discussions and in the conversations we've had. You've really been a big part of our debates and some rabbit holes we've gone down, so I've really enjoyed that. And I love it when people post questions like this in the forum, spots like this, really, because I think spots like this come up a lot. And I myself have been kind of unsure. And just to bring folks into it, it's a spot where we're out of position, but we have a very strong draw. And it's a delicate spot to play. So I'll just introduce the hand a little here from Stu's post. So it's a scoop event. So if people aren't aware, the Spring Cup of online poker. And so this has a field of 17,000 players and getting close to the money, paying $2,767. It's an $11 tournament on PokerStars. And Stu is holding one of my favorite hands, Ace-7 spade in the big blind with 8 players at the table. Blinds are 1250, 2500, and we have 63 big blinds back at about 157,000. So we have been through the tournament a bit. By the time the blinds are getting up to 1250, 2500. Stu, before we get into it, had you been at this table for long? Had you had a chance to develop any reads on anyone on the table?
Yeah, I was at that table quite a long time.
Oh, really? Okay, great.
Yeah,
Which is kind of rare in these big tournaments because the tables break so quickly. It's hard to get a lot of hands on people, but it is nice when you can play with a few people and maybe make some reads. Although I know that is a lot harder online too. Yeah, Stu.
Right. I think people were tightening up because it was getting close to the money, which wasn't really a significant amount, but you always want to make the money being in the tournament that long. You know?
Yes. Yeah, right. Especially those really large field ones, right? Where you have to put in quite a few hours just to get to that bubble. Okay, so you've noticed people are tightening up a little, and it's 8-handed at the moment. So I'll just describe the action. So the low jack limps for 2,500, and the cutoff raises to 3x. The small blind folds. So it's coming around to us. Had the low jack been limping as a strat? Was this their first limp, or had you noticed some limps from them before?
No, I hadn't seen that player play too often. So, yeah, okay. Limping in. Yeah, it was kind of strange to see.
Yeah.
Not much action, and then they limp. You'd think if they hadn't played much, they would be raising. But I think again because it was so close to the money.
Right.
No.
Okay, so we could talk about what that means for their range. If it's if they've been playing other hands that they haven't been limping, that might tell us something about it. But let's just stroll through and see So the cutoff raise is we're in a position now where we can call 2 more big blinds, or we can fold, or we can reopen the betting. I don't think I'm folding here. So the question is, should we call or should we put another bet in? Any thoughts from the panel at this point, or Stuart, what was your thinking at the time, Stu?
Well, I have 63 big blinds with ace, 7 of spades. I think I'm going to call one. I'm pretty sure the low jack's coming in. So then, it's a good sized pot to start with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? Would anyone else fold pre? Because I didn't consider folding pre, but afterwards I thought maybe I should have.
It's an interesting spot from just like the dynamics of what's going on, right? Like we're getting close to the money. When we're in a 17,000 person field, I always say the value of min caching goes up exponentially with the number of people that are playing in a tournament. So if you're used to playing small tournaments, like the difference between a cash and not cash isn't as big as when you play these huge fields, and the difference between a cash and not cash is huge in my mind, just from the aspect of you're at the point where you're about to cash, but you're still 2,700 some people away from making the final table, right? Like how much value are you actually going to get out of, let's say you triple up here. Like, are you that extremely likely to make the final table? No, you've got a minefield to go through. So the importance here in my mind is not busting. And that doesn't mean just fold everything, but it just means we don't want to bust in this spot. That is like priority number 1. So that's how I'm doing this hand. When it comes to me, I'm probably still calling here. I don't think it's crazy to fold, but I do think it's very, very tight to fold if we would choose that here. 3-betting is an option in terms of just trying to bring up the aggression right away. We're going to be out of position.
Right, thought about that too.
Potentially makes it a little bit easier for us to play, but I think all things considered, I think call is just the best option for us pre.
Yep,
I agree. It's like one of those big blind defense type hands. It's a nice hand to defend. I almost look at it as like the original limper just wasn't even there. I'm just really playing against that the guy that raised, because he only raised 3 big blinds. So basically he's raising 2 big blinds, based on the fact that there's a limper in there. So to me, it's just a big blind defense action, and I would definitely call there.
Yeah, take it, Chris. I can tell what you're going to say.
I like a raise.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. It's because of the limper. And everyone sort of made like assumption. Well, the limper will probably come along, and we've got a hand that we're going to be now multi-way. That's kind of like, it's kind of good. It can kind of flop well, but it's not that great to be out of position with A7. And I feel like we can learn. And so, yes, it's possible the limper is trapping, right? We're getting into that close to the money place. We haven't seen him limp before. But we're going to learn that real quick if we 3-bet. And actually, it's going to probably be cheaper than if we go into this spot and go multi-way or and find out sort of down the road that this was kind of a trappy limp low jack player. I really don't want to be going with A7 suited multi-way out of position if I can avoid it.
And the position's really key there, because being in position with a suited ace is actually like, it's a nice spot in a multi-way pot, because you're going to overflush somebody. You're going to have the nuts when someone else has a pretty good hand. But out of position, and we might see this come into play, it is harder to play these kind of hands out of position, and so there's some argument to isolating there.
And we're deep enough where it's where we can easily 3-bet fold this. I think we're probably going to find out that limp is, most of the time that limp's going to be pretty weak. And I think what we're probably going to do is just win this hand a lot. And if we don't, then it's a hand that, it's a hand that can flop still decently. And if we get 4-bet, it's easy to fold. I mean, tell me I'm wrong, but I really like a 3-bet here, because of the limp. I would defend this if it was just a cutoff open, but because of the limp, I like a 3-bet.
And when Chris says defends, he means just to call from the big blind is what that jargon means, as opposed to a 3-bet. And I think, one of the things I love about suited aces is that they make good calls and they make good 3-bets. So it's sometimes it can actually be a little paralyzing because you feel like, well, I've got this great candidate for both these actions. And so then you have to think, okay, so then what is the spot? What does the spot demand? Is this a spot where I should be calling? Are these opponents that I'm better off calling against or playing aggressively against? And it's hard to say that in a vacuum, but I do think that this is the kind of hand that you could fold, call, or 3-bet with, depending on stack sizes and player tendencies. So it's why it's a great example for us to talk about here. And it's why it's one of my favorite hands, because it's a really hard one to play correctly, right? But the thing I like most about what Chris says is that it's one of those sort of canonical 3-bet fold hands where you're actually ahead of some of their open calling range. You've got blockers against the hands that you don't want them to have, and it's an easy fold to their 4-bets. So it's one of those hands that.
So what size would the 3-bet?
Oh, good question. Great question. Yes, that's why Stu's out there killing it in the daily series every night. So good question. So there was a limp 3 behind. So I'm probably thinking like 8 or 9. Is that even too small? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, 10.
10. I was going to say 10, 10 and a half.
Out of position. I got to go bigger. Yeah. I was sizing down because the original raise over limp was smaller, but I shouldn't. That's playing their game. We should be setting our own price for these especially out of position, right? You guys are right. You're always right. So yeah, I like that too. 10 to 12
so
big blinds.
Still raise 10 big blinds fold, leaves me 53 bigs.
Yeah.
Still good stack.
Yeah. And a good rule for that, if people are looking for one, is like 25% of your stack. I think that's like a pretty good hard rule. So if you're at 40 big blinds, or if you're around 40 big blinds, you probably don't want to be 3-bet folding to 10. But more than that, and I think that is the right size. Thanks for keeping me honest, guys. So as played, we get the call, and the hijack does call. So on the flop, the pot is 26,000. And the flop comes pretty good for Stu. 5 of spades, 6 of spades, 10 of diamonds. Stu has ace of spades, 7 of spades. So we've got the nut flush draw. We've got a backdoor straight and nothing else, but there is a lot going on. I think in these dynamics, we're probably checking 100% of the time. Does anyone want to advocate for a lead here with any part of their range? I'm just checking all the time here. I haven't gone to the trouble of getting fancy enough to have a lead here.
Check to the aggressor.
Yeah, so we check. I think that's uncontroversial. The low jack bets half pot and the cutoff folds. So that's interesting. So that's the original limper that makes that bet. So I think we can talk a little bit about their range at that point. They've limped and called a raise, and then they chose to lead. We're all talking about how for us it's a fairly uncontroversial check out of position, but this player has decided to take the lead there. So what kind of hands might they want to do that with when the board comes 5, 6, 10, two-tone? What are they kind of? Yeah, take it, Taylor.
Could be raising a lot of alarm bells in your mind, like when you see this, like especially just like reading through like what you wrote, it can get lost in the confusion. But Jim did a really good job of pointing it out. Like this is the limper that was the passive player pre-flop, now deciding to lead out. Had it gone the other way of they check and then the cutoff opens, ranges are much wider. There could be more just blank overcards. But when this happens, this is actually pretty scary, right? Like someone was like, I'm just going to play passively, but then now all of a sudden is getting aggressive. And if we think about what is that limping range for the player pre-flop, a lot of hands that they limp these with are potentially like middle pairs, potentially suited connectors, and then potentially like aces or kings, like if they're trying to like be trappy about it. You never really know exactly what everyone's doing, but I feel like population tendency is limp suited hands and small pocket pairs, and potentially the like top of the range. And what's scary about that is like, why would you be leading on this flop with some of those hands? Like if you just called with like, you know, 2 suited cards, are you going to lead out because you have spades? Maybe, but now that's the best case scenario that we're thinking about. If you have 5, 6s, potentially 10s, that's scary. If they have aces, they have kings, that's scary. Just the way this action plays out is just kind of alarming to us, and we should kind of have those alerts up and be ready on how they're going to progress on future streets. Because now when it gets back to us, they bet half pot to us, and we have to decide what to do. And we're at a really crucial part of the hand, even though it may not really feel like it. We really are. If the cutoff had made this decision of, you know, I'm going to continuation bet into us, I absolutely love a check raise here. It functions so well because they have so many missed cards. They have overpairs. They have hands that have a lot of equity versus us, but they don't necessarily realize it at this point. Like ace king, ace queen. Those hands are like beating us, but we can get them to fold with a check raise. However, when that limper that just called and then now is becoming the aggressor, what hands do they have? And it's not a whole lot of like ace king, ace queen type of stuff. We're up against hands that generally just kind of have us way behind. And the only way that we're going to catch up is the flush. And granted, we do have this like nut flush potential, which is great, but we're also likely behind even if we hit a 7. If we hit an ace, it might be good, but we don't really know for sure. And we're kind of at this like indifferent spot. So a lot is going to be kind of decided here. Personally, I like the way you played it. I like just the call. There should be enough alarm bells that I'm not ready to like risk my stack here, especially in a spot where we're getting close to the money. We need to preserve our tournament life when we're talking about here. So I think a call here is like our only option.
And I really like the point that Taylor's making about the position of the raiser here, of the bettor, because as he points out, if it's that late position player, they've got all sorts of air in their C betting range there that we can then get to fold with a check raise. And most of the value in this hand is in the fold equity that comes from the check raise. When we get that action from the original limper, who then leads into the aggressor, removing the opportunity for that person to bluff. You know, you got to think about like, why are they trying to do that? And if you told me that the flop had 5 of spades, 6 of spades, and the 10 of diamonds, and that this limping player was either going to be doing it with sets or draws, I would tell you, well, as long as I don't have the ace of spades or the 7 of spades in my hand, I feel pretty good about it. But wait a second. Now I'm blocking all the nut flush draws that they can be leading with. I'm blocking all the I'm blocking all the 7s that they could have 2 overs for this straight draw with. I'm blocking a lot of those hands that I actually wanted them to have as natural bluffs at this point. So we really are we're even through this one action. And if people paid attention to Chris Jones's monthly seminar last month about post-flop betting lines, you would see why we should be getting these alarm bells going off when they take this flop lead. But you can tell we're actually really reducing the combos of hands that they should play this way into a pretty tight value range that's got a lot of sets and you know, some other hands, but we're kind of not even doing that well against some of those other hands either. So I think it's a clear check raise against that late position C bet, but I do like the call here. I think it does play better as a call out of position because the ranges aren't what we think they are necessarily at first. Any other thoughts on the flop before we?
Well, the only other thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you talk about ranges, it's definitely not a polarized range. It's definitely a very condensed range that is right around that 5, 6, 7, 8, and then and some spades in there maybe. But it's in that 5s or 6s or 7, 8 type thing. It's right in there. It's not way up here with ace king or way down here with 2-3. You know, it's right there in the middle. It's very condensed.
Yeah, it's a very narrow range, and we can, so that helps us, I think. Anytime that you can say like this is a range that just doesn't have many combinations in it, that should make it easier for us to hand read. And so I think that's why some of those alarm bells are going off. And that's why, again, just like I was saying, that 7 of spades is like one of the worst cards we could have, because it just eliminates a lot of those ones that we'd like them to have. So yeah, Chris.
The only other thing I would add about spades too is like, as Taylor was mentioning, you know, I think a lot of people who are doing this kind of limp calling, and it's a lot of suited connectors, it's a lot of small pairs, it's all that kind of stuff. And so like the dream scenario here, if we're gonna choose to raise, is that they have worse spades, right? But I think what we're gonna find is that the worst spades are gonna have a lot of tens in them. They're gonna have a lot of 10, you know, it's gonna be a lot of jack 10 of spades, queen 10 of spades, 10-9 of spades, all those kind of things. So we're actually gonna be behind a lot of their spades even. And so I'm really nervous right now, and I'm definitely not raising.
Yeah. I think that's
you lose that opportunity to get your draw too. If you raise and they shove on you, then you know,
yep.
I think you're better off to call there to see if you get the draw. So that's what I did anyway.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like if you were in position, you'd have an opportunity to do one of John Somsky's favorite plays here, which is to just put a big bet out into the pot on the flop in position, and then they're gonna check to you on the turn. You're actually gonna get to see the turn and the river with that one bet,
right,
and see if you actually realized. But out of position, you don't have that ability. So it's one real important difference. But I think you're right, Stu. I think that's the right thing to be thinking about. So as it is, we make the call. I think that's right. And in the chat, in the forum post, you say like, should I raise here? Was this a good place to raise? And I think it's that your intuition is telling you like, I have a strong draw. I have an opportunity to check raise here. And that's a good spot to be thinking about it. And I think if for whatever reason, you played it with that extra level of classic Canadian savvy and pot controlled into a call there. And Kim, pet vet, who, even though there was a half pot bet made here in the hand, she's stuck around. We haven't sent her out, tearing her hair out, running down the street, screaming. And she says, the solver says call. So according to the assumptions, Kim's put in what I assume is GTO plus, solver says call. Thank you, Kim. So turn comes the 4 of clubs. And this is like... Oh man. So now it's 4 of clubs, 5 of spades, 6 of spades, 10 of diamonds. We've got the ace 7 of spades. So we've got the 4, 5, 6, 7. We've still got the flush draw. We're open-ended with the nut flush draw. So here's a chance where we could consider leading. When we were talking with Ryan LaPlante on our Marek Madness show, he said like leading the turn was something that a lot of recreational players could do more of. I don't know if this is the spot to do it for the same reason why we didn't check raise the earlier street, because this player away from across the street from us is just going to be able to kind of play perfectly according to it. Yeah, Stuart, there's got our video watchers. Go check this out on YouTube. You can see we've got some screenshots of the game as it goes. So what were you thinking, Stu, when the 4 of clubs comes on the turn? I always see this and I'm like, oh, well, I'm clearly meant to win this hand. It's just a question of how now.
Well, I think I would rather, I should have probably, like once the turn comes, there's only one more card.
Right.
So again, I was thinking of like just check in and call whatever he bet.
Right.
That was my plan. But I wasn't expecting what he actually did.
so and I think the check is the right play here. Does anybody want to advocate for a lead at this point? As played with stacks, I don't see any. Okay, so I think checking is clearly the right call there. And what happens is the low jack just shoves a big overbet, I think, which is
like 54 big blinds, or it was all my stack.
Yeah,
it would have left me, I think, like a couple of thousand.
And you're left there with this sick feeling where you've got like half the deck helps you, but you can't add any fold equity, and it's just like, do I call and hope I win? Or because when you do, it's a huge turning point in the tournament, right? Like this is a pretty big stack for this guy to get it in. and you've got a whole lot of outs. So why don't we just talk about that terrible feeling and what we can do in that moment, and then maybe we can talk about what some other alternatives would have been in the moment. In this spot, what's everyone thinking? You've cleared the vomit from the back of your throat. You've taken a deep breath. Are people? Is this a clear call? Is this a clear fold? Is it? What would it depend on? What are people thinking?
I have 53 big blinds left, by the way.
53 behind, so you got 53 in your stack.
Yeah.
So like that's a lot of big blinds to call on a draw. And you could still be good with ace high here some portion of the time if you think about their opening range. I think a lot of the hands have been eliminated from their range that you are beating at this point, the way the action has gone. But we don't know that for sure. I think if we call, it's on the understanding that we need a spade and not a spade that pairs the board. And that's what we're basically calling for. Does that feel right to people? Is that the proposition that we're entertaining here? Yeah. Chris, you look like you want to.
Oh, go ahead. I think probably our straight is probably. I mean, I think our straight or our flush is good. So
sorry. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. That's right. Combo draw.
That's
sorry,
all
Taylor.
I was going to say, but go ahead, Taylor.
I was going to say, I have a clear decision on this turn. I'm not sure. I've been talking a lot on the previous reads. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in, but I'm going to take this brief moment of silence to say that no one else wants to chime in. So I think this is an extremely clear fold in this spot. Everything that we've been talking about before this just leads up to us folding. Stage of the tournament, we don't want to bust right now. We want to preserve our tournament life. Just that should be enough to get us to fold. The aggression or like how we would view our opponent's range should be putting alarm bells in our head that they could have some sort of really strong made hand. And granted, a lot of their like value that's making this jam purely as value, we can still beat. But when we do the math behind it, I think we have 17 outs. If that's true, if that's true that we have 17 outs, that's what, a third of the time we're going to win. Do we want to risk 50 plus big blinds to potentially win 120 or so? The math behind that essentially says no. I think you want to be around like 42-ish% equity. I'm kind of guessing at the numbers, but say something like that. We'd be giving up almost 10% equity by making the call if those outs are truly correct. If they're not correct, then you're essentially saying, well, I think an ace might be good, or I think a 7 might be good, or something else along the lines that you potentially have more outs, which then you got to think about what hands are they potentially bluffing with in this spot. And Jim stole my point. I was going to save this for this turn decision, but like we have absolutely terrible blockers here. We unblock, we block all the hands that we want them to have. That's it. We block all the hands we want them to have. We want them to have hands that have the 7 of spades in there. We want them to be on some sort of draw that looks good. We want them to have the ace of spades. We want them to be on that flush draw if, we potentially have some sort of better made hand. When they don't have the ace, they don't have the 7 of spades particularly. It really cuts down some of those other combos that we potentially hope that they would have here. Plus a lot of other hands, that potentially were bluffing on the flop just got there like 7-8. So slightly more value, but feels so much like a set. If I had to guess, you can just put this in your mind that they had pocket sixes here and we just made a really good fold and we just moved on with our life. I think that's just the best way of approaching it because everything is just pointing towards fold here.
I did fold.
Yep, I think that's a good fold. Good disciplined fold. He can't even bring himself to say pocket fives. All right, let's see if our friend Jonathan Little has anything to add to that, and then we'll come back and talk about this a little more.
Have you ever wondered whether you should call a preflop raise or 3-bet instead? What do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it Or do you just call? What do you do with ace king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at PokerCoaching.com/recpoker right now.
There we go. Thank you, Jonathan Little, great friend of the show. So I think it is a fold. I think it's tempting to think about what life would be like if you won the hand by calling and the draw came in and everyone comes in and picks you up on their shoulders and there's that big moment. But yeah, no, it's a fold. You knew it, but it goes to show like that having that ace in the 7 there. When we saw the flop, we were like, oh boy, I can't wait. The fact that I have these cards is really good for me right now. And it's a really interesting way that those blockers kind of work, because at first they're like permission to bet. They're permission to c-bet. They're permission to raise, because you've got hands that you can tell things about your opponent's hand just based on your own. But when your opponent's range contorts to the point where it's polarized like that, and it can only have very strong hands or the kind of hands that you block with those, then it really changes the importance of having those cards in your hand. So it was a really good example for that. So thanks for bringing that on, Stu. So what could we have done otherwise in the hand? I think you played it. I mean, I think he had a set, and I think
so too.
Yeah, I think you didn't pay him off for it. So and I think he, cost himself some chips maybe by leading that flop. I'm not sure, we can get into maybe what they did wrong, but what do people on the panel? When I first read the post, I thought, oh, I should be check raising this flop, and that's like the one thing I would do differently. But once we got into it and realized that it was the other player that was doing it, I think it is much better as a check call in the flop. The only
I did. Yeah, sorry.
No, please.
Kim said, did I cash? I did go on to cash. It was min cash because I lost pocket kings to 8-10.
Oh,
and they flopped 6-7-9. So
oh no!
I think I played that hand wrong though. So.
but honestly, I think like the A7 hand, what could we have done differently? Maybe we could have 3-bet pre-flop. Although I think they're likely calling with pocket sixes in position, likely. Limping players don't like to fold to raises, so we'll never know. But that's one thing. I mean, leading the turn, I guess, is the only. But I don't like it. I still prefer the check. So.
Yeah, I think it was well played. I agree with all the actions that were taken. Sometimes you just play a hand well, or you play. I'm not going to say perfectly, but like play a hand right and you lose.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's about losing the minimum when you get into those spots, and then other spots it's about winning as much as you can in some of those spots. So I think it was played well. I think the only other thing that we consider here, like Chris was talking about, is 3-betting pre. But then just being aware that we're 3-betting as a bluff there. Like our desired outcome is to get both those players to fold, and we just move on to the next hand. If we do 3-bet pre and we get called, we do get ourselves into a weird situation here on this flop, and depending on which player was in the hand, it could have potentially gone worse for us. So just a thing to consider, because 3-betting and 3-betting as a bluff increases the variance, and we're also at a stage of the tournament where we potentially don't want to do that. So I definitely get the 3-bet, because you could just take it down there. You're against ranges that you should be all right. But also you are increasing your variance at this crucial part of the tournament.
And specifically when it comes to 3-betting out of the blinds, you really got to be conscious of how quickly the combos of your 3-bets add up. So if you stick to the suited aces, like ace-7 suited, you're still going to get quite a few combos. Like if your 3-bet if you're three betting 100% of the time with hands like ace 8 down through ace 2 or something, that's actually a lot. That's a lot of combos. If heaven forbid, if you're including some offsuit aces in there, you're over three betting. I guarantee it. So you gotta turn some of those more desirable aces, like the suited aces, turn them into calls so that you can three bet some of that more garbage stuff when that's appropriate. And that's a whole nother episode. Maybe we'll get into that next week. But any final thoughts on this?
No, I agree 100% that the hand was played probably as well as you could, with the exception of Chris's action, which would be to three bet, which you probably would have got the limper to fold, and you probably would have got the initial razor to fold to your check raise.
Right.
That's could have happened. One thing I want to caution people though is when you're counting your outs, a lot of the outs that you are counting in there would have given a set a full house. For instance, the 4 of spades, the 10 of spades. So some of those outs are not clean outs. So you got to be careful.
Yep. Great point, Rob. And dirty outs are something that can really, especially on these close calls where, you think you've got just enough equity to make the call. That can make a really big difference. I like that. Great point. All right. Well, I just have so much fun doing these. I love it when we get premium members like Stu to come on the show with a post that they put in the forums themselves. If you're a Rec Poker Premium member, head on out there and just drop us a note in the forums. Post a hand or a question about strategy or different kinds of poker or whatever you like, and we'll bring you on here and tell you how great you played it. Right, Stu? I thought we learned a lot out of that too. So no, thank you. That's wonderful. All right, well, Stu, you're the man. Chris, Rob, Taylor, John, Kim in the chat, Jamel, who made some great points in the forum post as well. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.